Jill is a little bit sick today, under the weather and kind of sad, so if you guys want to send some well wishes to her in the comments, I appreciate that. But today we are going to be taking a look at Dragon Ball video games. Now, I know lately we've talked a lot about video games when it comes to anime, manga, all these properties. There is more to talk about than just that. But the recent situations around the Dragon Ball Sparking Zero game have been kind of fascinating, where there's been this big fall off of players over time. A lot of people lost interest. Even with the DLC, it had a spike, but it just kind of seems like a lot of people left the game because of different things like the cheesiness of the combat in terms of being able to just destroy other players with pretty cheap moves, and even things like the roster that a lot of people didn't connect with. Now, at the end of the day, I like that game, but it got me thinking there are definitely some things that I think Dragon Ball video games could improve on in general if they would just be willing to adapt to some new ideas that they haven't really been doing much of for many years. One of those would be original stories, something that I would love to see brought back. One would be adapting stories that are very rarely adapted, and another would be actually not just repeating Dragon Ball Z over and over and over again. So today we're going to take a look at that. If you enjoy the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, we appreciate you very, very much. But before we get into that more, we do have a question of the day, which is, what would your perfect or ideal Dragon Ball video game entail or be? Would it be a fighting game? Would it be an RPG? Would it be an open world discovery game? What story would it adapt? Would it adapt any story? Would it just be something totally new? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you. Now, with Dragon Ball games, for a while there were original stories, and even after that I would argue there was a push to do what-ifs. What-ifs do return in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, but unfortunately, as interesting as some of them are, a lot of them are fairly uninspired. Really what a lot of them do is something like Frieza won. Now Frieza is the Emperor of the Universe like Frieza said he'd be. And that's it. It's not really in detail or very specific, or it'll be something like, what happened if Goku didn't win this fight? Or what happened if Goku brought someone else to win this fight? Oh, they won it pretty much the same way in the end, and almost the exact same thing happened. There are some unique what-ifs in the Dragon Ball Sparking Zero campaign. However, a lot of them are not very unique. Dragon Ball Xenoverse did a very good job with this, where it actually had unique ideas, and you would be inserted with your OC essentially into the narrative of different moments throughout the series, whether it be from GT, whether it be from Super, whether it be from Z, whatever. It was kind of like, what if this went wrong, and you had to step in kind of as the time patrol and fix it. Those are cool what-ifs. Unfortunately, a lot of the what-ifs in recent years for Dragon Ball have been less detailed and really just boiled down to things turning out mostly the same or generically. And I think that what-ifs are something that you could do if you want to keep adapting these stories in the same way that Xenoverse 1 and 2 did, where you could essentially twist these stories on their head, actually tell a new story out of the framework of the old, while honoring things like what Toriyama did, what the anime writers did, you know, what all of these people did in the past, and still get something new out of that. On the other hand, if you look at something like Dragon Ball FighterZ, I would say that one of the more interesting aspects of that game is that it is pretty much a wholly original story. Now, is it the most in-depth and unique masterpiece of fiction ever made? No. But it did something different. It actually told a story that took place outside of this main continuity or outside of the pre-established storytelling that we've seen in the manga, animes, and previous video games. And new ideas aren't always good, but when it comes to Dragon Ball, there are so many different games that new ideas are kind of needed. Being able to see an originality in a story, being able to experience something other than just, yeah, I fought Frieza on planet Namek like in this episode of Z or Z Kai for the 100th time in a different video game. Yes, it can be fun, but being able to see new ideas outside of that is what's actually going to excite players to take part in your world or story. Like, yes, you can keep doing that and you can get competitive players, or you can get players that are just interested in multiplayer fighting games, but those players do drop off, and that always happens with fighting games. Every fighting game has a significant drop off. Some they never really recover from. People forget about them and don't care. Others, obviously, like the Street Fighters, the Mortal Kombats of the world, the Marvel vs. Capcoms, people keep coming back to even if the game is quote unquote dead. You can't rely on that multiplayer component though to be the core of your entire game if you're going to also bill it as a story game or as a game with a world, explorability, and a narrative. Interestingly though, if you do want to, I don't want to say lazily, but kind of lazily just adapt stories that have already been done before, you really could do something like one of the many series that haven't been adapted much. You know, now that Dragon Ball Daima is out, there's story you can do with Dragon Ball Daima. You know, now that we have had this cool off period where the hatred for Dragon Ball GT has died down, and there's actually a lot of fans who emerged from the woodwork who liked it, kind of like the Star Wars prequels where it's like people were bullied into silence and now they're kind of speaking out and saying, no, actually I enjoyed this. It's like, why not adapt GT? You know, there were only ever, oh man, 2, I believe, video games that were Dragon Ball GT themed. Other video games have used GT, but obviously just naming it Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z is what's going to get the most sales. So I'm not saying you have to name a game GT, but even if you wanted to tell a story inspired by something like that, or inspired by one of the anime exclusive movies, or inspired by really anything that's been done that isn't just the core progression of Dragon Ball Z's narrative, I think it would really benefit these characters and these stories and introduce new people to them that maybe didn't watch the anime. If you're worried about just repeating the anime, then why has Z been repeated ad nauseum? Again, I love Dragon Ball Z. I recently finished watching through Kai, and I thought it was incredible. I loved most of it. Majin Buu arc was a little too long, but overall, I thought it was great. But that said, I don't need every Dragon Ball video game to adapt that storyline. And it's weird because it feels like previous generations of Dragon Ball games didn't. It feels like they were better about this, where they would kind of switch on and off doing this in the past, especially the PS2, PS3, Xbox 360, going into that era. It's like some games would adapt it and other games would do entirely unique stories. But as we've gone on further, it feels like more and more of these games have just gone back to the same status quo of adapting Toriyama's most famous work, which was essentially Z. It's too bad because I think Dragon Ball is such a unique world with an amazing history, and when you look at some of the more unique stories, whether they be Dragon Ball Online, where it takes place much, much later, you look at Xenoverse, where it twists the stories on their head while telling original narratives, a lot of these different things, I think that those are kind of where the creativity of the video game franchises shine through the most. But unfortunately, it's not something that we're seeing as often nowadays. I think it's just easier to adapt whatever's out there and most popular, and a lot harder to come up with a new idea. But at the same time, you then run the risk of being repetitive and lazy, something that I think, unfortunately, Dragon Ball games are kind of heading for when it comes to narrative. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. I'd be interested to hear if you have ideas for a Dragon Ball game or what you think a good narrative or story would be. Would you want to see it move away from the characters we've already seen? Would it even be Dragon Ball then? Obviously something like Online kind of did both. Let me know what you think down there, and you know what? We actually have other ways to support this channel. We have a Fortnite code, Dragon Ball's been in Fortnite, DJAY123. So right there, a little crossover that's very, very fun. And we have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop. This is actually my wife Jill's shop. She does an amazing job here. She's starting to post more new things. She does coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled, repurposed comic book, manga, magazine, and more paper. Now, these are from paper from books that are damaged, and what we do is we save the paper that is undamaged, we transform it, we turn it into new works with resin. She does a beautiful job with this, all kinds of great stuff over here, and we recycle the rest. You can use code SAILOR for 10% off your first purchase over there, and check out our other channels in the description down below. There's also really cool handmade beaded jewelry over on CosmoBunny.shop, so we love if you check those things out. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye! Tell Jill to feel better.